Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to my C# for Beginners series. In the last lesson we learned what methods are and how to create simple void methods that do something without giving us back any result. In this lesson we are going to discuss about method parameters, how to declare other types of methods other than void, and we'll also discover that invisible method that I teased you about at the end of the last lesson. Remember how I said we've been using an invisible method all along? It's called the main method. Behind the scenes, C# wraps every single line of code that you write in a giant method called main, which is a special one. It's the method that gets called when you double-click your executable to run it. It's where your program starts its execution, and in fact it's called the execution entry point. So all this time, everything we've been writing has been living inside this special method without us even knowing it. We'll see this actually revealed entirely in the next lesson, where we'll discuss method overloading and other more advanced concepts, so stay tuned for that. Now back to making our methods more useful. So far we saw a method that always prints the same message, but what if we wanted to customize it? What if we wanted to call it with different names to greet different people? That can be done with the help of parameters. Between those round parentheses we can specify variables like this. Now our writeGreeting method takes a string as a parameter, or in other words, it mandates that whoever wants to call it must give a string value to that variable, to that parameter. And you can see we actually have 3 errors here, because again, it mandates that it wants a string parameter, but when we call it, we don't give that string value. So we actually need to come back and either give it a string value or declare a string variable and pass it to that parameter like this. Fine, we have a string parameter, we give a value to the string parameter, but how do we actually use it? Well, just like any other normal variable. We can concatenate it to our print message, we can reassign it, we can do whatever we want with it, just like we would with a normal variable, like this. And if I run it, you can see that the print message is customized with the string value that we used when we called it. This is a perfect time to discuss about variable scopes. This is a very important concept that beginners often struggle with. The name parameter is what we call a local variable. It's local to this method. It only exists and can be used inside the body, the block of code of this method, delimited by the opening and closing curly brackets. If I try to use it outside writeGreeting, I will get an error, because it is defined inside the scope of this method. It belongs to its body. Think of scopes like nested boxes. Variables declared in an outer scope are visible to inner scopes, but not vice versa. So a variable declared in an if statement is visible only in the body of that if statement, delimited by the curly brackets, and not outside. Once the if block ends, the variable declared inside it is gone. It can no longer be referenced. But a variable declared outside of that block is visible inside that block and in any inner blocks, no matter how deeply nested. Same with loops. A variable declared in a for loop is visible and lives only during that loop's execution. So the rule is simple. A variable is visible from its point of declaration until the end of the block where it was declared in, plus any inner blocks nested within that scope but not outside of it. Returning to our methods, what if I wanted my method to actually give me back a result? What if I wanted it to calculate some value and return that calculated value? All I need to do is replace the void keyword with any variable type. So let's assume we have a method that adds 2 numbers. I use the int keyword instead of void to indicate that this method does return a value, and that value is of type integer. But I also use the return keyword right here because I'm obliged to. If I said that this method returns an int, then I must return a value using the return keyword, and that value must be an int, otherwise I will get a compiler error. And this is where beginners often get trapped. If you declare a method that returns a value, like our add numbers returns an int, then all possible paths through that method must return a value. Let me show you what I mean by declaring a problematic method. We already have an error and not all code paths return a value. There's the compiler telling us that there is a scenario where we don't have a return statement, we don't return something. And in our case is when the condition is false, we don't hit a return statement. Okay, if x is greater than 0, we return x plus y, but what if it isn't? What do we return then? Nothing. And that would leave the method hanging, not knowing what to return. The fix is simple, just check all the branches in your method to have a return statement, or put a return statement at the end without any condition as a fallback. Now that we have a method to add numbers, we can call it just like we call the writeGreeting one, except this one takes two parameters, x and y, both of type int. So we can assign it values like 2 and 3, 6 and 1, and so on. But if we call it like this, it's useless. Sure, we call it with values and it does return the sum of x and y, but as soon as this call is completed, the value is returned, we don't save it anywhere, we don't put it anywhere, so it's immediately discarded, it's lost. We can correct that with this. We declare a variable normally, but we initialize it with the result returned by this method. Now here is something interesting about void methods that I didn't mention in the last video. Even though they don't return a value, you can still use the return keyword inside them. Why would you do that? Because the return statement doesn't just return values, it also exits methods immediately. So let me show you. If I run it, only the first message is printed. Why? Because the return statement immediately exits the method. Whatever follows after will never be executed. In fact, even Visual Studio is smart enough to color it a bit darker to indicate that that code is unreachable. It's what we call unreachable code. So, why would you need this? For instance, when we want to exit a method early, based on some condition, like for instance, when an error happens, or when you want to stop the processing or something like that, you can just return and exit the method. Pay attention to a nuance too. In the case of the add numbers, we had to say return and then some value, because when we declare the method, we said it returns an int. But in the case of the void method, we are allowed to say just return. Return nothing, because void means nothing. For this lesson, have some practice. Create a method that asks for a person's age and returns whether they can vote or not. Maybe return true if their age is over 18 and false otherwise, and so on. Make sure that all your code paths return a value and maybe add a fallback return statement at the end. In the next lesson, which is the last one in the topic about methods, we'll touch on subjects like method overloading, where we have the same method with different variations, and you'll finally be able to understand why we are able to call Console.WriteLine with different kind of data. I'll also show you that hidden main method in all its glory, so stay tuned. For now, like, subscribe, all that fluffy thing you already know about. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you in the next tech frame.